Welcome to the Bag Chatter Podcast. I am your host, Adam. I am joined, as always, by a man who is not actually here. He's stuck in Italy with his family. Yes, Brian is gallivanting in the land that the Olive Garden made famous. In the meantime, you're unfortunately going to be forced to listen to me drone on about a couple golf rounds I recently played. So Brian, enjoy Italy, enjoy your family, say hi to the Mario Brothers for me, and eat a Totino's pizza roll in my honor. I recently played in the Frank Wood Memorial Championship at Jeffersonville Golf Club in Norristown, Pennsylvania. Frank Wood was the head pro of Jeffersonville and died of pneumonia in 1934, paving the way for a lot of people to Google who Frank Wood is when they enter his memorial championship. While the discovery that Frank had existed made me wonder if it was too soon to play golf in his honor, that was not the only thing that brought anxiety in the days leading up to the tournament. As discussed in previous episodes, my game has been, let's say, volatile. This season has been marked by some of the best stretches of golf of my life, followed by range sessions where I was a literal hosel jockey. My last 3 rounds at Honeybrook, I posted scores of 69, 68, and 87. The first time I had ever shot in the 60s back-to-back was followed by the worst round I had shot at my home course in at least the last 5 years. Having 2 kids under 20 months old is not conducive to practicing as much as I'd like to, but in the days leading up to the tournament, I found time. I recently made an iron change so the reps felt more important than ever. After an incredible range session that made me question why I hadn't upgraded sooner, I went to hit a few drivers and driving irons. If you have listened to the podcast, you know that I have fallen in love with my Titleist T200 2-iron. I can get it out there between 255 and 270, and having that club in the bag has been a game changer. I don't spend a lot of time with the longer clubs on the range, and when I hit it perfect on the first 2 swings, I was tempted to stop. One more good one, I told myself, as I lined up one more ball. I caught this one a fraction thin, but the contact felt jarring. Had it been in a movie, there would have been a flash of white light, ominous music, or maybe a referee informing the opposing coach that there's nothing in the rulebook that says a dog can't play basketball. I looked up to see the head of my 2-iron flying, with a slight draw, what I would later learn to be 175 yards into the driving range. I immediately wheeled around to see if anyone would marvel at the sheer club head speed required to send an iron head the distance of an above-average 7-iron. But strangely, it appeared that nobody was paying attention to me at all. Panic set in. Not only did I love this 2-iron, but Jeffersonville Golf Club was seemingly built for me to hit 2-iron off the tee. A Donald Ross design with characteristically diabolical greens, angles into the green are vital to scoring well. I got in the car and took my broken weapon to the Golf Galaxy where I had purchased it. I held it out to them in 2 hands, as if begging them to reforge it so I could defeat Sauron once more. I first inquired about repairing it, but they told me it would take 7 to 10 business days to get a shaft to replace the one that I had broken. Nowhere near soon enough to honor Frank Wood properly. I began to leave the store, but I went to look at the driving irons and wondered whether I should perhaps purchase another. Having 2 kids under 20 months old is also not conducive to having $270 to spend on a second driving iron in 4 months. As I gazed at a clone of the friend I had lost, a bald man in dark-rimmed glasses interrupted my longing. He informed me that my club was broken in a place that might be covered by something called a warranty. While that would take time, he also offered to lend me the demo of my club for the weekend. I asked if he could also bend it 3 degrees flat for me for the weekend. He laughed at me, and I accepted his terms. I suspect he wasn't used to dealing with such a skilled negotiator. But seriously, thank you to Mike and everyone at Golf Galaxy of Devon, Pennsylvania for saving my weekend. With 14 clubs back in the bag, I went home and played with my kids. My wife suggested we go to Honeybrook for dinner. I could hit balls before my tournament, my son could play on the putting green. I threw my clubs in her car, and we were off. This couldn't have been working out better. But then the kids fell asleep on the way to the course. They fell asleep in that perfect window where either they're down for the night or they wake up an hour too late and are up till 3 a.m. We decided not to risk it. We went home and got the kids to bed at a reasonable hour. My tee time for round 1 of the James Woods commencement tournament started at 8:50. I lived 40 minutes from Jeffersonville, so that meant if I wanted to get in a good warm-up, I would need to leave at a time that I previously didn't believe actually existed. My alarm went off at 6 and I left the house at 6:30. I was shocked to learn that the sun rises in the east is not just a weird idiom that old men say sometimes. Jeffersonville recently underwent an incredible renovation, but they still don't have a driving range, and I didn't realize this. I went inside and asked how to get range balls and was informed that there was no range, but that I would get 15 minutes in their simulator, 30 minutes before my tee time. I had time to kill. I was hungry. I went to the restaurant and had a breakfast sandwich. I talked with people, and we looked forward to our round, where we would definitely all have golf clubs. I lost track of time a little bit. Before I knew it, it was 8:15, only 5 minutes until my simulator time. I ran to my car, opened my trunk, and almost dropped to my knees. I saw a pair of golf shoes, a couple of boxes of Pro V1s, an unfortunately empty bag of Jack Link's beef tender bites, an umbrella, and enough window washer fluid to wipe every fly who has ever lived off your windshield. What I didn't see, however, was golf clubs. In my panic about this realization, I ran to the passenger seat just in case I had stuffed them in there and didn't remember a TSI 3 bumping my ear for the entirety of my drive to the course. I slammed my trunk and ran to the first tee to talk to the tournament director. A word about the tournament director. He and I have not had the smoothest relationship. The things that led to this are likely my fault and involved an unintentionally bounced check 10 years ago, and then a 5-year saga that was kicked off by a question he had regarding my amateur status. Emails were exchanged between us, and while there was never anything overtly hostile, they certainly weren't Paul's letter to the Philippians either. But this year, I finally made my amateur status irreproachable. One of the things I looked forward to most was entering this series of tournaments, but I worried slightly about my relationship with the tournament director. He sat at a table under a tent at the first tee. I arrived there in a slight jog at 8:22. The group going off was receiving and exchanging their scorecards. I stood awkwardly outside the tent as they exchanged pleasantries that I was annoyed by, because every minute that passed leaked closer to my tee time. I stood there, waiting impatiently as if the tent wasn't made up of 0 walls. At 8:28, the 8:30 tee time finally hit their drives. "Adam, what can I do for you?" he asked me. "Pat, I am so embarrassed, but I left my golf clubs in my wife's car." His name isn't Pat, of course. That's a pseudonym. I don't know why I said that. His name is definitely Pat. "Well, that is definitely a problem," Pat told me. "Am I just screwed, or what do I do?" is, I believe, what came out of my mouth. Pat was so nice about it, but he did tell me there was not much he could do. There were no places to fit me in. Was I really going to be disqualified from the Frank Oz Invitational before it even started? It was still only 8:32. I had 18 minutes. Rental clubs. Playing with clubs that weren't my own in a tournament seemed ridiculous, but maybe. I ran towards the clubhouse where they told me they did have rental clubs. As they fetched my new clubs, Pat emerged in the doorway. "Someone just withdrew at 11:30, Adam. Can you make 11:30? I could make 11:30. I drove home, got my clubs, kissed my children, ate more breakfast, and drove back. I arrived back at the first tee at 11:30, and to mix things up, I brought golf clubs with me. 14 of them, if you can believe that. That's how dedicated I was to Frank Thomas's legacy. With the Big Hertz trophy on a pedestal to my right, I hit my drive off the first tee. It was perfect. My approach shot hit the wrong tier of the green and gave me a preview of what I would be looking at for the next 36 holes. I hit a pretty good putt that just trickled and trickled until I had 8 feet left for par. My par putt barely slid into the hole. Crisis averted. As I walked off the first green, my playing partner Mark congratulated me on my par and said, "Boy, that wind is picking up, huh?" I hadn't noticed it much on the first hole, but he was right. As I stood over my ball on the second tee, a gust of wind nearly knocked me over, causing me to step away from my ball. My tee shot got up into the wind and started going left, and then further left, and then further left. The wind blew the ball a mere 2 feet from the out-of-bounds stakes. From there, I hit what I thought was a good wedge shot that landed about a third of the way onto the green, and then proceeded to roll 15 yards back off the front of the green. I lipped out the 8-footer for par. 1 over. I found myself at +2 on the 6th hole, where I was looking at the only legitimate birdie look I would have all day. 12 feet, straight up the hill. I needed this one, and I knew it. My putt looked good the whole way, tracking right for the center before wobbling ever so slightly right and horseshoeing straight back at me. If that weren't enough, the ball stopped, then trickled halfway back to my feet. I made the 6-footer to avoid complete disaster. I bogeyed the next and then doubled the par 3/8. You might like to hear about those holes, but I'd rather tell you about my playing partner. Upon dunking a ball in the water on 8, he wheeled around to gesture at another group a few hundred yards away. "Did you hear that?" he asked. When he missed a 5-footer on the same hole, he became indignant at the imaginary interruptions. "Again?" he said. "There are other people playing, fellas." At this point, the other group was no longer even in sight. He was the living embodiment of the P.G. Wodehouse quote, "He missed short putts because of the uproar of the butterflies in the adjoining meadows," and it was a joy to watch. The back 9 started with an atrocious bogey, and was followed by several more of varying degrees of atrocity. I made par on the final 3 holes to card around 81. I certainly didn't come out intending to shoot an 81, but I took some comfort when I looked at the leaderboard and saw that the struggle had been felt by everyone. There are routinely several people under par in these tournaments, and I have frequently seen winning scores in the 5 to 7 under range. Between the whipping winds and the lightning greens, round 1 produced only 1 score of even par, and nobody else shot better than 2 over. My 81 was good for T17 out of 37. I was very surprised at that despite the conditions. Both my playing partners shot in the high 90s, and as we turned in our cards, one of them remarked, "Well, at least we know tomorrow can't be worse." "I wouldn't bet on that," Pat said, pulling out his phone to show us the weather. The wind on day 2 was projected to be 10 miles per hour stronger with gusts over 40. It could and would get worse. The putting green at Jeffersonville is shielded from the wind by the clubhouse a bit. On day 1, I hadn't felt any wind on the putting green, despite it being some of the more difficult conditions I'd ever played in. On day 2, I had to chase my hat down twice. We were in for it. As I put my peg in the ground, my playing partner voiced something that I believed we were all thinking. "Play well, boys," he said. "Prepare for carnage." Carnage. That was the word I heard most on day 2. It would have gotten annoying if it weren't so accurate. People couldn't help themselves. It was carnage. After hard-fought bogeys on 1 and 2, a slight cut up the right side caught a gust that moved the ball 40 yards right. A lost ball and a 3-putt later, I made triple. The par 5-6 was playing straight downwind. I hit a good drive and then had 230 into the green. Knowing it was downwind, I pulled a 5-iron and hit one right on line with the pin. When I got up there, my ball was nowhere to be found. After a couple minutes of searching, we found it, in a backyard almost 50 yards beyond the green. My 5-iron had traveled almost 280 yards in a jet stream, and I was out of bounds. I went back to my original spot and felt fortunate to make a 7. With plenty of other bogeys and another double on 9, I turned in 11 over 46. The leaders weren't faring much better. The day 1 leader was 8 over through 7 holes and still remained only 3 off the lead. There isn't much to say about the back 9, or at least not much that I want to. I was once again betrayed by the "it couldn't get worse" thought. On the 220-yard par 3 15th, I missed the green pin high right. A severe slope to the front of the green and the wind whipping back towards the tee had me throw my pitch shot about 20 feet right of the pin. It dove left, took a peek at the hole on the way by, and stopped about 18 inches below the hole for what looked like a rare par. As I walked to my ball, I heard one of my playing partners say, "Don't you dare." I looked up and my ball had moved about 6 inches, but it was still moving ever so slightly, wobbling in the wind and occasionally rolling a few more inches. I got to my ball and tried to mark it, but it rolled a little more before I could. I backed up as it took a couple more slow rotations and then had to get out of the way as it picked up speed and ran about 60 feet off the front of the green and then 15 to 20 yards down the fairway. I went on to make triple. I capped my day off with another triple to post a tidy 93, which was somehow still good for 27th. The winner of the tournament was named Patrick Itzwan, and he won with a final score of 9 over par. In the 2 days after the tournament, Patrick would go on to win medalist honors at the Philly Amateur, where he posted 9 under par. A field filled with plus handicaps, Philadelphia major winners, and players who have qualified for USGA events, and rounds of 74 and 75 were good enough to get it done. That's just how hard Jeffersonville played for those 2 days. It doesn't make me feel much better about failing to break 90 for the first time in a decade, but maybe a little. As we handed our scorecards to Pat at the scoring table, there was a collective sigh from the entire group. "Let me guess," he said. "Carnage?" I had come to honor Frank Costanza's legacy, and instead my golf game had spit on his grave. In the days since, I have tried to remind myself that I didn't actually hit the ball that bad. There were no shanks, no chunks, no double chips, just a lot of missed yardages and a whole lot of putts. The Woody from Toy Story Memorial Championship is one that will endure in my memory as the most difficult 2 rounds of golf I have ever played, whether I want to remember them or not. So what's next? While Brian continues to travel the world at the expense of the best-looking podcast host he's ever had, my brother Grant will be traveling from Florida in hopes of defending our title at the Honeybrook Member Guest. The week after that, Brian will tee it up in the Lancaster Country Club Member Guest on the heels of the U.S. Women's Open being played there, and I will be playing in the Lancaster County Amateur while he does. All of this and more in the coming weeks of Bag Chatter. Thanks for listening.
Thanks so much for checking out the Bag Chatter podcast. Hope you enjoyed the episode, and you already know how to subscribe to podcasts, so I'm not going to waste your time. You can find us on all the socials at Bag Chatter Golf or Brian Lane Golf. And you can check out everything we have going on at bagchattergolf.com. If you want more content from me and Adam, check out the Bag Chatter Deli. That is our Patreon, where we only serve the choicest portions of 4-ball ham and the leanest cuts of bone meat. For $5 a month, you get to support the pod, and you get a weekly episode of our Friday supporter-only podcast, Cold Cuts, Hot Takes. You can find that at patreon.com/bagchattergolf. You guys are the best. Thanks so much for listening.